He hired her because she was silent, a ghost to clean his mansion and care for his niece. He made her sign a contract, no noise, no personal life, no past. But Julian Thorne made one mistake. He didn't look closely at the mute nanny's hands. If he had, he would have recognized the woman he thought died 3 years ago. And he certainly didn't know that every night, she was sneaking out to feed 2 hungry children hidden in the slums. 2 children with his gray eyes and his stubborn chin. What happens when the heartless billionaire finds out his dead fiancée has been living under his roof, hiding his secret twins? You need to hear this story. This reunion will shatter his world. If you love deep emotional romances, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the ending. Now, close your eyes. Let the rain begin. The faucet dripped. Plink, plink, plink. In the crushing quiet of the apartment, the sound was like a hammer hitting an anvil. Elara sat at the chipped formica table, her hands wrapped tight around a ceramic mug. The water inside was hot, but there was no tea bag left to flavor it. She drank it anyway, letting the heat travel down her throat, trying to trick her stomach into thinking it was full. Across the room, on the mattress pushed into the corner, the twins were finally asleep. Leo and Mia, 3 years old, small for their age, and the only reason Elara's heart still beat in her chest. She watched Leo's chest rise and fall under the thin gray blanket. He had kicked his socks off again. Beside him, Mia was curled into a tight ball, her thumb hovering near her mouth. They were perfect, they were innocent, and they were hungry. Elara squeezed her eyes shut. The silence in her throat was a physical weight, a jagged stone she had swallowed 3 years ago on the night the world ended. The doctors called it psychogenic aphonia. Her body called it survival. If she didn't speak, she couldn't scream. And if she didn't scream, maybe she wouldn't fall apart completely. But silence didn't pay the rent. She looked at the bright red notice sitting on the counter, illuminated by the streetlight flickering outside the window. Final eviction warning. She had 24 hours. Elara stood up, the metal chair legs scraping loudly against the linoleum. Too loud. Everything was too loud when you couldn't make a sound yourself. She moved to the mirror by the door. Her blazer was second-hand, navy blue, and slightly frayed at the cuffs, but she had pinned it carefully on the inside to hide the wear. She smoothed her hair back. She had to look professional. She had to look like she didn't belong in a building where the elevator hadn't worked since 2019. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor, peeked in, her face wrinkled with concern. She was the only soul in the city who knew about the twins, though even she didn't know who their father was. No one did. That was a secret Elara had buried deeper than her voice. "Go," Mrs. Higgins whispered, waving a hand. "I've got them. Just get the job, dear. Don't worry about us." Elara pressed her palms together in thanks, her eyes stinging. She couldn't say thank you. She couldn't say, "I'm scared." She just nodded, grabbed her bag, and stepped out into a hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. The placement agency was on the other side of town, in a glass tower that reflected the gray sky. Inside, the air was conditioned to a chill that made Elara wish she had a scarf. The recruiter, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper gaze, frowned at Elara's file. She flipped the page, the paper snapping crisply. "Your references are old," the woman said, not looking up. "Nothing for the last 3 years. And this note here." She finally raised her eyes, narrowing them as she assessed Elara. "You don't speak? At all?" Elara didn't flinch. She was used to the look, the mix of pity and annoyance. She reached into her bag and pulled out her small, leather-bound notepad. She had already written the answer while waiting. In the lobby, she turned the book around and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. "I am mute, I am not deaf, and I am excellent with children. I don't need a voice to keep them safe, disciplined, and loved." The recruiter read it, her eyebrows lifting slightly. She looked back at Elara. Elara held her gaze. She didn't blink. She poured every ounce of her maternal ferocity into that look. "Give me a chance. I will scrub floors with a toothbrush if I have to. I have 2 mouths to feed." "Well," the recruiter sighed, leaning back in her leather chair. It's highly irregular. But the client is difficult. He's fired 5 nannies in 2 months. He doesn't want someone who chats. He wants someone who works. He wants a ghost. Elara picked up her pen. I am good at being invisible. It's a live-in position, the recruiter warned, stamping a document. High security. NDA required. You live at the estate. No outside distractions. Elara's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the pen. Live in. She would have to leave Leo and Mia with Mrs. Higgins overnight, sneaking back only when she could. It was risky. It was terrifying. But then her eyes fell on the salary figure typed at the bottom of the page. It was enough to move them out of the slums. It was enough to buy winter coats. It was enough to save them. I'll take it, she wrote. Good. The driver is waiting downstairs. He wants to screen the final candidates immediately. Elara stood, her knees weak with a mixture of relief and nausea. She walked out of the office, stepping into the cool autumn air of the city. High above the street, a massive digital billboard was scrolling the midday financial news. She paused to button her coat, her eyes drifting upward. Business tycoon seeking stability for Ward. The headline flashed. Then, the picture changed. A face filled the screen, 10 feet tall. Sharp cheekbones carved from granite. Eyes the color of a stormy sea, cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of mercy. A mouth that had once whispered promises against her skin was now set in a grim, hard line. Elara stopped breathing. The street noise, the honking taxis, the shouting vendors, the rush of the wind, faded into a buzzing static in her ears. She knew those eyes. She saw them every single morning when she looked at Leo. The recruiter had said the client was difficult. She hadn't said he was the ghost from her past. It was Julian Thorne, the father of her children. The man who thought she had died in the accident 3 years ago. And now, fate was sending her straight into his lion's den. The iron gates of the Thorne estate didn't just open, they parted like the jaws of a trap. Elara watched through the tinted window of the town car as the driveway wound upward, flanked by trees that looked too perfect to be real. At the top of the hill sat the house. It wasn't a home. It was a monolith of gray stone and aggressive glass, staring down at the city like a judgment. Her hands were sweating. She wiped them on her skirt, the cheap fabric raspy against her palms. She had told herself in the car that he was just a man, just an employer. But as the heavy oak doors swallowed her whole, she knew she was lying. Inside, the air was different. It didn't smell like lemon pledge or cooking oil. It smelled of cold marble, filtered oxygen, and silence so expensive it felt heavy on her shoulders. A severe-looking housekeeper led her down a hallway that seemed to stretch for miles. Their footsteps echoed clack, 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 a sharp intrusion in the stillness. Elara kept her head down, counting the tiles. 1, 2, breathe. 1, 2, survive. He is in the library, the housekeeper said, stopping before a set of double doors. Do not waste his time. Elara nodded. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was vast, lined with books that had likely never been opened. At the far end, behind a desk that looked like a slab of obsidian, stood Julian. He was looking out the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her. The silhouette was etched into her memory, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he held his head, arrogant and weary all at once. But he seemed sharper now, as if the last 3 years had chiseled away anything soft and left only the flint beneath. He turned. Elara's breath hitched, a silent gasp that died in her throat. His eyes were the same Arctic blue, but they were dead, flat. There was no spark, no humor, just a cold, calculating assessment as he swept his gaze over her. He didn't see Elara, the woman who had once laughed in his bed. He saw an applicant, a product. You're the mute, he said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating on the floorboards beneath her feet. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Elara stood straighter. She gripped her notepad and nodded once. Julian walked around the desk, moving with a predatory grace. He stopped 3 feet away. Too close. She could smell him, sandalwood and the faint, bitter scent of ink. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she feared he could hear it. They tell me you're efficient, Julian said, crossing his arms. But I don't need a ghost. I need a warden. My niece Ivy, she is not a child. She is a natural disaster. As if on cue, a piercing scream shattered the atmosphere. A small side door burst open, and a girl of about 6 stormed in. She was red-faced and tear-streaked and was holding a porcelain figurine. I hate you! The child shrieked at Julian. I want to go home. I want my mommy! Julian flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of his jaw, but Elara saw it. He didn't know how to handle the raw, messy grief of a child. He looked ready to call security. Ivy, put that down, Julian ordered, his voice hard. Now. No! Ivy raised her arm to throw the figurine. Julian took a step forward, his anger spiking, but Elara moved first. She didn't run. She didn't wave her arms. She simply glided between the man and the child, sinking to her knees in one fluid motion. She was now at eye level with Ivy. The little girl froze, startled by the woman who had appeared without a sound. Elara didn't reach for the toy. She didn't scold. She simply looked at Ivy. She let her face soften, dropping the mask of the professional applicant to reveal the mother beneath. She offered a profound, sad empathy. She tapped her own chest, over her heart, and then pointed to Ivy's. I know it hurts. Ivy's arm lowered. The screaming stopped, replaced by confused, hiccuping sobs. Elara held out a hand, palm up. A request, not a demand. Slowly, shakily, Ivy placed the figurine in Elara's hand. Elara smiled, a genuine, warm thing that reached her eyes, and gently brushed stray hair from the girl's sticky forehead. The silence in the room returned, but the tension had snapped. Elara stood up and looked at Julian. He was staring at her. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a reluctant fascination. He looked from the calm child back to Elara, his brows knitting together. Effective, he murmured. He walked back to his desk, pulled a file from a stack, and uncapped a heavy fountain pen. The job is yours, he said, his tone businesslike again. But understand the rules. You live here. You do not leave the grounds without permission. No guests. No noise. My life is complicated enough. I do not want yours bleeding into it. Elara's stomach twisted. No leaving. How would she see the twins? She would have to figure it out. She had to. She needed this money. Julian slid a thick contract across the obsidian desk. Sign at the bottom. Non-disclosure, non-compete, and a clause for immediate termination if you bring drama to my doorstep. Elara stepped forward. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She focused entirely on the paper, terrified to look at him again. She signed her name, Elara Vance, her handwriting looping and elegant. She set the pen down. Julian reached for the paper, but his hand paused mid-air. He was looking at her fingers, specifically, the way she held her hands clasped in front of her now that the pen was gone. A habit she had never broken. Slowly, Julian's gaze traveled up her arm, to her neck, and finally to her face. He squinted, tilting his head slightly, as if trying to see through a fog. You look familiar, he whispered. The coldness in his voice cracked, just for a second. Have we met? Elara felt the blood drain from her face. The room spun. If he recognized her, if he realized who she was, he would find the twins. He would take them. He had the money, the lawyers, and the power. She was just a mute maid in a blazer that didn't fit. She shook her head. A sharp, definitive no. She pointed to the door, feigning a question about her start time. Julian stared at her for a heartbeat longer, searching. Then, the steel curtain dropped back over his eyes. He dismissed the thought. She was too thin, too poor, and too quiet to be the vibrant woman he had lost. Start immediately, he said, looking away. Get Ivy out of my sight. Elara grabbed the child's hand and turned, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 years. She had entered the lion's den and survived. But as she walked out, she could feel his eyes boring into her back, watching, wondering. The Thorne estate was a mausoleum by day, but at night, it breathed. The settling of the foundation sounded like groans. The wind against the glass was a constant, mournful whistle. For 2 weeks, Elara had lived in the shadows. Her routine was a carefully choreographed dance. Wake at 5. Dress in the severe gray uniform the housekeeper provided. Tend to Ivy, who had gone from screaming banshee to a shadow that clung to Elara's skirts. Eat quickly. Hide. But the hardest part was the deception. Every afternoon during Ivy's nap, Elara would sprint to the service gate. There, hidden by the overgrown ivy of the perimeter wall, Mrs. Higgins would be waiting on the public sidewalk. Through the iron bars, Elara would pass an envelope of cash and Tupperware containers filled with the gourmet food she'd saved from the staff meals. Roasted chicken, fresh fruit, and pastries the chef was going to throw away. Mrs. Higgins would whisper updates. Leo misses you. Mia drew you a picture. And then she would hand Elara small tokens, a drawing, a sock that needed darning, which Elara would hide in her apron like contraband diamonds. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. And unknown to Elara, she was being watched. In the master study, the glow of the monitors painted Julian's face in blue light. He sat with a tumbler of amber liquid, watching the screen. Camera 4, the nursery. Elara was sitting in the rocking chair, Ivy asleep in her lap. The room was dim, lit only by a night light. There was a tranquility to the scene that made Julian's teeth ache. For 3 years, this house had been a war zone of his own making. He liked the cold. He deserved the silence. But this woman, this mute, skittish creature, she was warming the air. The staff was calmer. Ivy stopped throwing tantrums. Even the damn dog stopped barking. It irritated him. It felt like she was smoothing over the jagged edges of his grief without his permission. On the screen, Elara shifted. She looked down at Ivy, her expression so tender it felt voyeuristic to watch. Then, she began to rock. Her mouth opened slightly. She wasn't singing, she couldn't, but her throat moved. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm he recognized. Julian leaned forward, the whiskey forgotten. She was humming, or trying to. A silent lullaby. A memory slammed into him, visceral and unbidden. Sunlight on white sheets. Elara, his Elara, laughing as she hummed a tune against his neck, the vibration buzzing against his skin. Julian slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black, but the image burned behind his eyelids. Enough, he muttered. He needed air. He needed the ghost to be just an employee, not a specter of his dead past. Elara was in the staff kitchen, making tea. It was past midnight. The house was asleep. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes. In her pocket, her fingers traced the cold metal of a small toy car Mrs. Higgins had passed her today. Leo's favorite. The wheel was broken, and she had promised to fix it. She pulled it out, examining the tiny axle under the undercabinet lights. It was a cheap, plastic thing, battered and scratched. You're up late. The voice came from the shadows, deep and rough like gravel. Elara jumped, nearly dropping the toy. She spun around. Julian was standing in the doorway. He was without his suit jacket, his tie undone, and his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. He walked into the light of the kitchen, his eyes locking onto her hand. Elara tried to shove the toy back into her pocket, but she was too slow. What is that? Julian asked. He didn't sound angry, just focused, intense. Elara froze. She opened her hand slowly. The blue plastic car sat on her palm, looking ridiculous against the marble backdrop of a billionaire's kitchen. Julian reached out. His fingers brushed hers, electric, hot, shocking, as he picked up the toy. He held it up to the light. It was clearly a child's toy, but not Ivy's. Ivy played with porcelain dolls and imported puzzles. This was a dollar store wreck. He looked at the car, then at her. His eyes narrowed. This isn't Ivy's, he stated. And you don't have children. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Liar! Her conscience screamed. Tell him it belongs to his son. But fear choked her. She couldn't. Not yet. She grabbed her notepad from the counter. Her hand shook as she wrote. Found it in the garden. Must be from the gardener's son. She showed him the paper. Julian read it. He looked back at the toy, spinning the broken wheel with his thumb. He didn't look convinced. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half the pieces. "The gardener doesn't have a son," Julian said softly. Elara stopped breathing. He took a step closer, invading her space. The scent of him, whiskey and night air, filled her senses. He held the toy out but didn't release it when she reached for it. For a moment they were tethered by the cheap plastic car, a current of unspoken tension arcing between them. "You have secrets, Elara," he whispered, his voice dropping to a register that made her knees weak. "And I hate secrets." He dropped the toy into her hand. "Fix the wheel," he said, turning his back on her. "And go to bed. You look exhausted." Elara clutched the toy to her chest, watching him disappear into the dark hallway. She was safe for tonight, but the ice was cracking, and she wasn't sure if she was afraid of falling in or desperate to be caught. The sky turned a bruised purple just after dinner. By 8 o'clock, the wind was screaming around the eaves of Thorne Manor like a dying animal. The storm wasn't just outside, it was about to break down the door. Stay tuned. In moments, the billionaire who hates weakness is about to see her break, and his reaction will change everything. Elara was in the library, shelving books Ivy had pulled down earlier, when the first crack of thunder hit. Boom! It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow. The floorboards vibrated. The windows rattled in their frames. Elara dropped the book in her hands. Pride and Prejudice hit the floor with a thud, but she didn't hear it. All she heard was the screech of tires, the crunch of metal, the roar of the truck that had run her off the road 3 years ago. Flash. Lightning illuminated the room in stark, ghostly white. Boom. Elara fell to her knees. Her hands flew to her ears, pressing hard, trying to keep the sound out, trying to keep the memory from tearing her apart. Her throat constricted, her vocal cords straining in a scream that would never come. She curled into a ball between the towering oak shelves, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. The lights flickered once, twice. Then the house plunged into absolute darkness. She was trapped. She was back in the wreck. She couldn't breathe. "Ivy?" A deep voice cut through the dark. "Ivy, stay in your room." Footsteps. Heavy, hurried. The beam of a flashlight sliced through the blackness, sweeping across the rows of books. The light hit Elara. "Elara?" Julian's voice was sharp and authoritative, but when he saw her, curled on the Persian rug, rocking, gasping for air, the tone shattered. The flashlight beam lowered, softening the glare. He was beside her in 2 strides. "Elara, look at me." She couldn't. Her eyes were squeezed shut, tears leaking out hot and fast. She was hyperventilating, the lack of oxygen making her fingers numb. Julian didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what was wrong. He saw the terror, raw and animalistic, and he reacted. He sat down on the floor, his expensive suit trousers ignoring the dust. He moved closer, positioning his large body between her and the floor-to-ceiling window where the lightning was flashing like strobe lights. He became a wall, a shield. "It's just noise," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Just noise. You're safe. You're here." Another crash of thunder shook the house. Elara whimpered, a broken, strangled sound that tore at Julian's chest. He reached out. His hand, large and warm, covered both of hers where they clamped over her ears. He didn't pull them away. He just held them there, adding his strength to hers. The sensory shift was immediate. The smell of him, rich scotch, clean rain, and the musk of his skin, overpowered the metallic scent of her fear. The heat from his body radiated into her cold side. "Breathe," he commanded, but softly. "Match me. In, out." He took a deep, exaggerated breath. Elara tried to follow, her lungs hitching. "That's it," he murmured. Again. The storm raged outside, pounding against the glass, but in the small sanctuary of his shadow, the world narrowed down to the rhythm of his breathing and the warmth of his hands. "I used to hate storms," Julian said quietly. He wasn't talking to her, exactly. He was just filling the silence, drowning out the thunder with his low, rumbling baritone. "When I was a boy, my father would lock me in the study during them. Said fear was a weakness." Elara's eyes fluttered open. In the dim light, she could see the outline of his jaw and the heavy slope of his brow. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his hands covering hers. He was wrong, Julian continued, his thumb brushing unconsciously against her wrist. Fear isn't weakness. It's just evidence. Evidence that you have something to lose. He turned his head then. His eyes found hers in the dark. They weren't cold anymore. They were dark pools of something unnameable. Pain, recognition, longing. Elara stopped shaking. The panic was still there, buzzing under her skin, but the terror was gone. She felt anchored. She carefully pulled one hand from under his and reached for her pocket but realized she had left her notepad upstairs. She looked at him, helpless. I can't talk to you. Julian seemed to understand. He shifted, turning fully toward her. The flashlight lay on the floor between them, casting long shadows up the walls. You don't need the paper, he said. He reached up. His fingers, rough, calloused, gentle, grazed her cheek, wiping away a streak of wetness. The touch was electric. It sent a shockwave through her that had nothing to do with the storm. Elara leaned into his touch, just for a second. It was instinct. It was starvation. Julian froze. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, his gaze dropping to her mouth. For a moment, the air between them was charged with something dangerous. Not fear. Desire. You don't have to be silent with me, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Even if you can't speak, I hear you. God help me, I hear you. The thunder rumbled again, distant now, retreating. But inside the library, the storm had just begun. The morning after the storm, the air was scrubbed clean. The sky was a piercing, innocent blue that denied any violence had ever occurred. But inside Thorne Manor, everything had changed. It wasn't spoken. It felt. Elara was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes that had been battered by the wind. She wore her gardening gloves and an old oversized sweater, her hair tied back in a loose knot. She heard the crunch of gravel. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The rhythm of his footsteps, heavy, purposeful, was etched into her mind. Julian stopped beside her. He was dressed for the office, immaculate in charcoal gray, but he didn't look like he was in a hurry to leave. You missed a spot, he said dryly. Elara looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She pointed a thorn-covered branch at him in mock warning. He smirked. A real smirk. It transformed his face, shaving 10 years off the hard lines around his mouth. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, silver pen. Then, he took the notepad sticking out of her apron pocket. The hydrangeas need water, he wrote, and the gardener is lazy. He handed it back. Elara wrote below it, the gardener is afraid of you. Everyone is. Julian read it, his smirk fading into something softer, more contemplative. Are you? Elara hesitated. The pen hovered over the paper. Was she afraid? Yes. But not of his anger anymore. She was afraid of his kindness. She was afraid of how easily she fit into the negative space beside him. Sometimes, she wrote. Julian looked at her, his eyes searching hers. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. The dynamic shifted. The notepad became their lifeline, their private channel. Over the next week, the pages filled up, not with instructions about Ivy or grocery lists, but with them. At the breakfast table, while Ivy was busy drowning her pancakes in syrup. Julian, why don't you eat meat? Elara, too expensive growing up. Got used to vegetables. Julian, I'll tell the chef. No more veal. In the hallway, passing each other, as he came home early, again, Julian, rough meeting. The board of directors are vultures. Elara, do you want tea? Or something stronger? Julian, just sit with me. And they would. They would sit in the living room, he with a file open on his lap, she mending Ivy's clothes, saying nothing but saying everything. It was an intimacy without touch. It was seductive in its quietness. Julian wasn't the monster the tablets painted him to be. He was lonely. He was a man who had built a castle to keep people out, only to realize he had locked himself in. Elara watched him one evening as he helped Ivy with a puzzle. He was patient now, guided by Elara's gentle nudges over the past weeks. He laughed when he couldn't find the corner piece. The sound of his laugh tore Elara in two. Guilt, sharp and acrid, rose in her throat. He deserves to know, a voice whispered. He deserves to know he has a son who laughs just like that. A daughter who has his stubborn chin. But then the fear would return. The deception was too deep. If she told him now, after weeks of lying, after infiltrating his home, he wouldn't see a mother protecting her cubs. He would see a con artist. He would take the children and exile her. She knew him. He forgave mistakes, but he destroyed betrayals. Saturday morning, the house was quiet. Julian found her in the sunroom. She was reading, her legs tucked under her. He sat down opposite her. He didn't have a book. He didn't have a phone. He just watched her. "I cancelled my trip to Tokyo," he said. Elara looked up, surprised. Tokyo was the merger deal of the century. It was all the news channels were talking about. She grabbed the notepad. "Why?" Julian took the pad from her. He didn't write immediately. He ran his thumb over the paper, tracing the indentations of her previous words. "Because the house feels empty when I'm gone," he wrote. He pushed the pad back to her. Elara stared at the words. Her heart did a traitorous flip. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, clasping his hands. His gaze was intense, stripping away her defenses layer by layer. "Who are you, Elara?" he asked softly. "Really?" Elara froze. "You have the hands of a worker but the grace of a duchess," he continued. "You understand loss in a way that unsettles me. And you look at me sometimes like you've known me for 1,000 years. He reached out and took the pen from her frozen fingers. He turned to a fresh page. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the loudest thing in the room. "Why are you really here, Elara?" He wrote the letters sharp and jagged. "You seem like you're hiding a whole world behind those eyes." He left the notepad open on the table between them. Elara stared at the question. It was an invitation. It was a trap. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and wet. She wanted to tell him. God, she wanted to tell him. She opened her mouth, her throat working, straining against the silence. But nothing came out, just a broken breath. Julian watched her struggle, his expression unreadable. He didn't push. He just waited, letting the question hang in the air between them like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. The grand ballroom of Thorne Manor glittered. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the marble floors, and the air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and judgment. Elara wanted to be invisible. Julian had insisted she attend. "Ivy needs supervision," he had said, though his eyes had lingered on Elara's face a moment too long. "And I trust no one else." So here she was, standing in the shadows near a pillar, wearing a simple black dress she had bought from a thrift store. It was elegant but modest, a sharp contrast to the sea of sequins and silk swirling around her. Ivy was behaving, sitting quietly with a coloring book at a small table Elara had set up. Well, if it doesn't help." Elara stiffened. Vanessa St. Clair glided toward her. Tall, blonde, and dripping in diamonds, Vanessa was Julian's ex-fiancée. A woman who had made it clear 3 years ago that she considered anyone with a net worth under 10 million to be a different species. Vanessa looked Elara up and down, a sneer curling her red lips. "I heard Julian hired a charity case," Vanessa drawled, her voice loud enough to turn heads nearby. "But I didn't realize he was running a shelter. Is it true you can't speak? Or are you just too stupid to form words?" Elara kept her chin high. She didn't react. She had faced worse than a mean girl in a ball gown. She had faced hunger. She had faced death. "Cat got your tongue?" Vanessa laughed, a brittle, cruel sound. She reached out and flicked the fabric of Elara's sleeve. "Polyester. How tragic. You look like a mute servant from a Dickens novel. Does he make you scrub the toilets too?" A few guests nearby tittered, covering their mouths with champagne flutes. Elara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Not shame, anger. She turned to walk away, to remove herself from the toxicity, but Vanessa stepped in her path. "Don't walk away when I'm Vanessa." The name was spoken quietly, but it cut through the room like a whip crack. The chatter died instantly. Julian materialized from the crowd. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, but his face was dark, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying fury. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at Elara, scanning her face for damage. He stepped between them, his back to his ex, shielding Elara from the room. "Julian, darling," Vanessa purred, trying to recover. "I was just making conversation with your employee. She's terribly rude." Julian turned slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rude?" Julian repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You come into my home, drink my wine, and insult the woman who brings peace to this house. She's just a mute nanny, Julian. Don't be dramatic." Julian took a step toward Vanessa. She faltered, taking a step back. "She is not just anything," Julian snarled. "She has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire bloodline." The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Julian turned back to Elara. He didn't care about the staring eyes. He reached out and placed his hand on the small of her back. The touch was firm, possessive, and warm. It branded her. He looked at Vanessa one last time. "She speaks more truth in her silence than you do with all your noise. Get out." Vanessa gaped, humiliated. She turned and fled, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble. Julian didn't watch her go. He looked down at Elara. His hand was still on her back, his thumb rubbing soothing circles against the fabric of her dress. "Are you all right?" he murmured, oblivious to the 100 people watching. Elara looked up at him. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt cherished, protected. She nodded, a small, tremulous smile touching her lips. Later, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Elara walked down the hallway toward her room. She was exhausted and emotionally drained but buzzing with adrenaline. She heard his door open. Julian stepped out. He had discarded his tie and jacket. He looked raw, undone. "Elara," she stopped. He walked toward her, closing the distance until he was towering over her. The hallway was dim and intimate. "I hated tonight," he said, his voice rough. "I hated seeing you in the corner. I hated that they looked at you like you were less." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb traced her bottom lip. "I don't want you to be invisible," he whispered. "And I don't want you to be just the nanny anymore." Elara's breath hitched. She stared into his eyes, stormy, desperate, open. "I want," he trailed off, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was about to say. "I want you. In every way a man can want a woman." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me to stop," he breathed against her skin. "Write it down. Push me away. But don't just stand there and let me fall if you're not going to catch me." Elara stood frozen. Every instinct screamed. "Kiss him." Every fear screamed. "Run." But she didn't run. She closed her eyes, and she didn't pull away. The bubble burst on a Tuesday afternoon. It didn't happen with a bang, but with the shrill ring of the intercom phone in the main foyer. Elara was polishing the banister, humming that silent tune in her head. She was happy. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile hope growing in her chest. Julian's confession in the hallway had changed everything. He hadn't kissed her, not yet, but the promise of it hung in the air between them, sweet and heavy. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, answered the phone. Her face went pale. "Security at the main gate, sir," she said, looking toward the study where Julian was working. "There's a situation." Julian emerged, looking annoyed at the interruption. "What situation?" "A woman. An elderly woman. She's collapsed. But she left 2 children. She claims their mother works here." Elara's rag dropped to the floor. "Mrs. Higgins, the secret she kept for 3 years is about to be exposed. Don't go anywhere." Julian is about to walk down that driveway and look into the eyes of his own son. You do not want to miss the explosion. The blood drained from Elara's face so fast the room spun. She didn't wait. She didn't think so. She bolted for the door. "Elara?" Julian called, startled by her sudden sprint. She didn't stop. She pushed through the heavy oak doors and ran down the long, gravel driveway. Her lungs burned. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Please let them be okay. Please let this be a mistake. But as she rounded the final bend toward the iron gates, the nightmare came into focus. An ambulance was already there, lights flashing silently. Paramedics were loading Mrs. Higgins onto a stretcher. And there, standing by the guard booth, looking small and terrified, holding hands, were Leo and Mia. Elara's knees almost gave out. She rushed toward them, falling to the ground and pulling them into her arms. She buried her face in their necks, smelling their familiar scent of milk and baby shampoo, checking them for injuries. "Mama!" Leo cried, clinging to her. "Nana fell down! Mama!" Mia echoed, bursting into tears. Elara rocked them, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay. I've got you. I've got you." Then, she felt it. A shadow falling over them. A coldness that had nothing to do with the wind. She looked up. Julian was standing 3 feet away. He wasn't looking at the ambulance. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking at Leo. The silence was deafening. It was louder than the thunder, louder than the crash 3 years ago. It was the sound of a world ending. Julian stared at the boy. He stared at the messy dark hair that curled exactly like his own. He stared at the gray eyes, his eyes, that looked back at him with innocent curiosity. Then he looked at Mia, at the dimple in her left cheek that appeared when she cried. The same dimple his mother had possessed. The same dimple he saw in the mirror every morning. Julian's face went gray. The color leached out of him until he looked like a statue. He took a staggering step back, as if physically struck. He looked at Elara. The tenderness from the hallway was gone. The warmth from the library was incinerated. In its place was a look of such profound betrayal it cut Elara to the bone. "Are they?" His voice cracked. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He pointed a shaking finger at Leo. Elara couldn't lie. Not with his eyes on them. Not with the truth standing there in light-up sneakers. She nodded. Tears spilled over her cheeks, hot and fast. She reached a hand toward him, a silent plea. "Let me explain. Please." Julian flinched away from her hand as if she were holding a knife. He looked back at the children. His chest heaved. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure agony. 3 years, he whispered. "You were dead. You were dead, and they were." He looked at the guards, who were averting their eyes. He looked at the paramedics. He saw the scene, the poverty of the children's clothes, the desperation in Elara's eyes. He straightened up. The mask slammed down. The heartless billionaire returned, harder and colder than before. The walls of his fortress went up, reinforced with steel. "Take the woman to the hospital," he barked at the paramedics, his voice ice. He turned to Elara. His eyes were dead. "Bring them inside," he commanded. Elara scrambled to stand, pulling the twins close. "And then," Julian said, turning his back on her, "you will explain to me why I shouldn't throw you out on the street and take them from you right now." He walked away, his stride long and angry, leaving Elara shivering in the driveway, clutching the secrets she could no longer hide. The study felt like a courtroom. Julian sat behind his desk, the vast expanse of obsidian serving as a barrier between them. Elara stood in the center of the room. Her hands were shaking. "Explain," Julian said. One word. No emotion. Elara pulled out her notepad. She wrote so fast the pen tore through the paper. "I didn't know I was pregnant when I left. After the accident, I woke up in a charity ward. I had no voice, no money, no memory for weeks." She ripped the page off and placed it on the desk. Julian didn't touch it. He just read it, his jaw tight. "By the time I remembered who you were, I saw you on the news. You were with Vanessa. You looked happy, and I was broken." "Happy?" Julian let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He stood up, pacing to the window. "I was mourning you. I was burying an empty casket because they never found your body in the river. I spent 3 years in hell, Elara. And you were raising my children in a slum." He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with hurt. "My son," he said, the words choking him. "My daughter. Walking, talking, breathing. And I missed it. I missed their first steps. I missed their first words. You stole that from me." Elara flinched. The truth of it, the raw, ugly truth, hit her. She had stolen it. Out of fear, yes, but the result was the same. "I was afraid you would take them," she wrote, her hand trembling. You are powerful. I am nobody. I thought you would see me as a mistake. Julian looked at the note. A mistake? He looked at her, his expression shattering for a second. You were the only thing that was ever real. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, the wall was back up. I can't look at you right now, he said quietly. I can't trust you, and I won't let you near them until I decide what to do. Elara's heart stopped. She took a step forward, reaching for him, a silent scream building in her chest. No, please. Mrs. Gable has taken them to the guest wing, Julian said, turning away. They will be fed. They will be safe. You will stay in your room. Do not leave it. Julian. She mouthed his name. Go, he ordered. He didn't shout. He just sounded defeated. Elara sat on the edge of her bed. It was 3 a.m. The house was silent, but her mind was screaming. He will take them. She knew how this story ended. The billionaire father discovers the secret heirs. He hires the best lawyers. He proves the mother is unfit, poor, and disabled. He wins. She becomes a footnote, a visitor on weekends. She couldn't survive that. She could survive hunger. She could survive silence. But she couldn't survive becoming a stranger to her own children. She stood up. She grabbed her battered duffel bag from the closet. She didn't pack her clothes. She packed the essentials. The twins' birth certificates, her passport, the few dollars she had saved from her wages. She would leave. She would disappear. It was madness, she knew that. But fear wasn't rational. Fear was a mother animal sensing a predator. She moved to the window. It opened onto the trellis that led down to the garden. She had checked it weeks ago, just in case. She looked toward the door, toward the guest wing where her babies were sleeping in silk sheets. I will come back for them, she promised into the dark. I just need to get out before he locks me in. In the guest wing, Julian sat in a chair by the bed. Leo was sprawled out, one arm hanging off the mattress. Mia was curled up, clutching a stuffed bear. Julian watched them. He watched the rise and fall of their chests. He saw his own nose on Leo's face. He saw Elara's delicate brow on Mia's. He swirled the whiskey in his glass. He hadn't taken a sip. He was furious. He was gutted. But beneath the rage, there was something else. Ah, they are mine. He reached out and touched Leo's hand. It was small, warm, and sticky. Real. I missed you, he whispered to the sleeping boy. I'm so sorry I missed you. He thought of Elara. He thought of her terror in the driveway. He thought of the notepad. I was afraid. Was he that terrifying? Had he become so cold that the woman he loved thought he would destroy her rather than save her? Guilt, sharp and cold, pierced his anger. He stood up. He needed to talk to her. Not as a judge, but as a father. As a man who had just been given a miracle he didn't deserve. He walked down the hall to her room. He hesitated at the door, then knocked softly. Elara? Silence. Elara, open the door. We need to figure this out. Nothing. He turned the handle. It wasn't locked. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was made, the sheets smooth and cold. The closet door stood open bare. And across the room, the heavy velvet curtains billowed in the night wind. The window was wide open. Julian rushed to the sill, looking out into the darkness of the garden. Elara! He shouted, his voice tearing through the night. But the only answer was the wind in the trees and the crushing, empty silence she had left behind. The note was on the pillow. It wasn't a letter. It was a tear-stained page torn from her notebook, weighted down by the sapphire engagement ring he had given her 3 years ago, the one she must have kept hidden in her pocket all this time. They need a father who can give them the world. I can only give them love, and love doesn't pay for schools or safety. Be good to them, Julian. Tell them I went to find my voice. I will disappear so you don't have to fight me. Julian read it twice. The first time, he felt anger. How dare she leave him again? How dare she make decisions for him? The second time, he felt the floor drop out from under him. I will disappear. The words echoed in the empty room. She was doing it for them. She was breaking her own heart, tearing herself away from the only things keeping her alive, because she believed, truly believed, that she was unworthy of the life he could offer, because she thought he didn't want her. Idiot, he choked out, crumpling the note in his fist. You stupid, stubborn fool. He didn't call security. He didn't call the driver. He grabbed his keys and ran. The city was drowning in rain. It was 4:15 a.m. Julian drove like a madman. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel of the Aston Martin. He knew where she would go. The central train station. It was the only way out of the city at this hour without a car. Don't be gone. Please, God, don't be gone. He drifted around a corner, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. He pulled up to the curb, ignoring the "no parking" sign. He left the car running, the door open, and sprinted into the station. The main concourse was cavernous and cold, smelling of diesel and damp wool. A few stragglers huddled on benches. The announcement board clicked over. Express to the coast, departing 4:20 a.m. Track 4. Julian ran. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his breath tearing at his lungs. His coat flew open, his shirt soaked instantly by the rain blowing in from the open platform. He burst onto the platform. The train was there, hissing steam, doors beginning to slide shut. He scanned the windows. A blur of faces. Then he saw her. She was standing near the last car, one foot on the step. She wasn't looking at the train. She was looking back toward the city, her face a mask of absolute devastation. Her duffel bag hung heavy on her shoulder. Elara! She froze. She turned. Her eyes went wide. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, fragile, terrified, and ready to bolt. She stepped up onto the train. No! Julian lunged. He covered the distance in seconds, ignoring the conductor shouting at him. He reached out and grabbed her arm just as the doors began to hiss. He yanked her back onto the platform. The momentum spun her around, and she crashed into his chest. The train doors slammed shut. The whistle blew, a mournful, lonely sound. The train began to move, picking up speed, leaving them behind in a cloud of exhaust. Elara struggled. She pushed against his chest, her mouth open in a silent sob, her hands beating weakly against his wet shirt. Let me go. Let me go. Never. Julian gasped, wrapping his arms around her, crushing her to him. Never again. He buried his face in her wet hair. He was shaking. He, Julian Thorne, the man who terrified boardrooms and broke competitors, was trembling like a leaf. You were going to leave me, he said, pulling back to look at her. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping down his nose. You were going to leave me with everything I ever wanted, except the one thing that makes it matter. Elara stared at him. She stopped fighting. She searched his face, looking for the anger, the rejection. She found only desperation. Julian let go of her arms and did something that made the few people on the platform stop and stare. He dropped to his knees, right there on the dirty, oil-stained concrete. In the rain, in his $1,000 suit, he looked up at her, oblivious to the world. I don't want the children without you, he said, his voice cracking. I don't want the house without you. I don't want myself without you. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out her notepad, the one she had left on the pillow. He had shoved it in his pocket without thinking. He pulled out his pen. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He wrote 3 words on the back of her goodbye note. He held it up to her, rain smearing the ink, but the message was clear. I am empty. He looked at her, eyes red-rimmed and raw. You filled the silence, Elara. Don't make it quiet again. Please. Elara let out a sound, a small, broken whimper. Her bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground. She dropped to her knees in front of him. She didn't care about the mud. She didn't care about the cold. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder, and wept. Julian held her. He held her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning universe. And as the rain washed over them, he knew that the storm was finally over. The silence that had once strangled Thorne Manor was gone. In its place was a cacophony, a beautiful, messy, chaotic symphony of noise. Elara stood on the terrace, a mug of tea in her hand, hot, sweet, and made by a housekeeper who now smiled at her instead of looking through her. The garden, once a manicured display of Julian's control, was currently a battlefield. "Get him, Papa! Get the monster!" Leo was screeching with delight, running in circles around the fountain. Mia was right behind him, brandishing a plastic sword. And the monster? Julian Thorne, the man who terrified Wall Street. The man who had once looked at children as if they were alien species. He was on his hands and knees in the grass, his crisp white linen shirt stained green at the elbows, growling playfully as he chased his son. He caught Leo, swinging him up into the air until the boy's laughter rang off the stone walls of the house. Julian's face was open to the sun, his eyes crinkling at the corners, not with stress, but with pure, unadulterated joy. Elara's chest ached, but it was a good ache. It was the feeling of a heart stretching to accommodate more love than it was built to hold. 6 months. It had been 6 months since the rain-slicked platform, since the surrender. It hadn't been easy. There were lawyers to fire, birth certificates to amend, and a press conference where Julian had stood before 100 cameras, held Elara's hand, and told the world that he had found his family. He hadn't explained the silence. He hadn't explained the poverty. He simply said, "They are mine, and they are home." Elara set her mug down on the stone railing. She touched her throat. It was still scarred on the inside. The damage from the accident was deep, woven into the nerves and the psyche. But Dr. Aris, the specialist Julian had flown in from Switzerland, said the vocal cords were intact. They were just asleep, atrophied by trauma. "Push," he had said. "Push the sound out." Julian stopped his game. He had seen her watching. He set Leo down, whispering something that sent the twins scampering off toward the swing set. Then, he walked toward the terrace. He moved differently now. The tension that used to coil in his shoulders was gone. He walked like a man who had nothing left to prove and everything to protect. He climbed the steps, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You're staring," he teased, leaning against the railing beside her. He smelled of grass and sunshine. Elara smiled. She reached out, straightening his collar. She pulled her notepad from her pocket. Old habits died hard, but Julian covered her hand. "No," he said softly. "Not today." He turned her to face him, his hands resting on her waist. His thumbs brushed the fabric of her yellow sundress, a color she never would have worn a year ago. "You look happy," he murmured. Elara nodded. She was happy. She was safe. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had saved her when she thought she was saving him. She took a deep breath. She felt the air fill her lungs, expanding her diaphragm just like the doctor had taught her. She focused on the vibration in her chest. She focused on the love that was too big to stay silent. Her lips parted. July. The sound was small, raspy. It sounded like rusty hinges opening after a century of disuse. Julian went still. His eyes widened, locking onto her mouth. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the air up, pushing past the fear, past the memory of the crash, past the 3 years of silence. She swallowed dryly. She opened her eyes. Julian was holding his breath, his expression one of reverence. "Love you?" It wasn't a whisper. It was a voice. Her voice. Broken, gravelly, and imperfect. But it was there. The silence shattered. Julian let out a ragged exhale. Tears, bright and sudden, sprang to his eyes. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. He pulled her into him, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tight she could feel the frantic beat of his heart against her own. "Mama spoke!" Leo shouted from the grass, pointing. "Mia! Mama spoke!" The twins came running, crashing into their legs, a tangle of small arms and laughter. Julian lifted his head. He looked down at Elara, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. He kissed her forehead, lingering there, breathing her in. "Loud and clear, my love," he whispered into her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "Loud and clear." Elara closed her eyes and listened. The birds were singing. The children were laughing. And for the first time in forever, her own voice was part of the song. Elara found her voice, and Julian found his heart. If this story of healing and second chances touched you, please leave a comment. And if you're not ready to sleep yet, click the video on your screen right now. Another billionaire is hiding a secret, and he needs to be saved. I'll see you there.